First, I want to introduce, for over 30 years, curator, author, and critic Vicki Goldberg helped navigate a generation through an ever-changing world of photography, documenting how photographs changes our lives and how our lives change photography. Her work can be seen in the pages of the New York Times and Vanity Fair, along with many books, including the essential compendium Photography in Print. It was a textbook for me in college, and it's considered one of the best books on photography ever written. Her biography of Magnum photographer Bruce Davidson was published in April of this year. Please welcome Vicki Goldberg.
Thank you, Vince. Thank you.
That's a Look3 welcome, Vicki. That's the way we do that. Nick Brandt fell in love with Africa and animals and photography while directing a music video there with Michael Jackson in 1995. By the end of 2012, he had switched professions and completed a trilogy of books that established his work in galleries and museums all over the world. Taken together, the book titles complete a sentence and illuminate the paradox of a natural world vanishing at the hand of man. On this earth, a shadow falls across the ravaged land. You know a Nick Brandt photograph when you see it. It can stop you in your tracks and take your breath away and startle you with a calm, a classical beauty that is idyllic and romantic, a grace composed from a moment when the natural world held its breath and was brought still to a quiet, but for the accented note of a shutter firing to score its passing. As Nick's work has evolved, the narrative reveals more of the unnecessary and tragic conflict between beauty and beast in the last of these wildest of places. Is this work the trailer for an apocalyptic ending of life wild as we know it? Beauty or beast? You can decide which is which. Nick Brandt has taken a stand, angry and active on behalf of both. Please welcome Nick Brandt.
Thank you, Vince. Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Well, as Vince remarked, Nick got into this from a related field, and photographers have done that before. Cindy Sherman, for instance, was a painting student and decided that she could combine performance and art if she did photography. She does not call herself a photographer, she calls herself an artist. Sometimes, incidentally, it went the other way. You may not know that Stanley Kubrick was a photographer for Look magazine for 2 years before he ever made a film. Nick, there was a particular reason why you got into photography. What was it?
Animals. Animals and the disappearing natural world. I had no intention of becoming a photographer. Animals were my first love. I couldn't figure out a way of expressing my feelings about them. And going to Africa, I suddenly realized there was a way to express my feelings, to convey the feeling that animals are sentient creatures not so different from us. And that's when I began taking photographs, portraits of them in 2000. Oh, I think I'm supposed to pick up this. That was a cue for that. The animals came first, and photography merely the medium through which to express my feelings about them.
And did you realize right away when you photographed the animals that they were on their way out or threatened?
It was being a pessimist by I think genetically as well, being Jewish. And English. It's kind of a double whammy. English and Jewish.
I think I'll go along with that.
I kind of was, I felt that it was always going to be an elegy to a vanishing world. I just didn't realize, even as pessimistic as I am, just how fast it would be.
But your first pictures were about the world as, in effect, the way it was, but as it should be.
Yeah, it was kind of the honeymoon period. So we put together a few photos to show the honeymoon period where everything's just fine and dandy. and actually apparently infrared as well. Fine and dandy equals infrared. I have no idea why. It just did. It felt like that's what you do. So these are some of the early shots. Oh, yeah. So this photograph, Vicky will mention this. This is actually, more than any photograph I've ever taken, one that people absolutely swear is photoshopped.
He considers that
The
a dirty
P word.
Yes, well, and obviously from your statement, it is not photoshopped.
Anybody who wants to swing by my house in California can come and see the contact sheets and see that all those giraffes were lined up in exactly that way. The rays of sun were coming down in exactly that way. There were two negatives shot consecutively, stitched together. 14 days of waiting to get that. People like Franz and Nick Nichols in the audience will know exactly what I'm talking about, the necessity of waiting, and its patience brings luck.
But you never Photoshop, right?
I Photoshop in the context of stitching images together when there's a panorama, and I Photoshop to grade like you did in the darkroom, darkening and lightening. Of course, Photoshop enables you to, I call it grading still, grade, I can't say the other P word, process, in a detailed way. But no, animals are not added in, skies are not added in, etc., etc. That's the integrity of the scene remains. If you ask my safari guides, is that what was there? They would sign on the dotted line and say yes.
Well, I won't ask. But I found this an astonishing image. Say what happened, why this elephant is in this cloud.
Again, this is kind of an anomaly because I always wanted to take portraits of animals in a state of being. I was never interested in photographs of animals in action. And also, I didn't really like ever photographing in sunlight. This kind of somehow encapsulates everything I don't like, and yet it's an animal in action, it's in sun, but the cloud of dust becomes effectively the clouds that I always crave to be in the shots. And to my surprise, because you've always got this tunnel vision, somebody said early on, oh, it's like he's walking through the clouds. I hadn't even, literally through the clouds, this giant elephant, which I hadn't even realized. To me, it was just, dust.
But explain why there is such a cloud of dust.
He's just throwing the dust over himself to cool as he walks along in the midday sun.
Most of us haven't tried that.
And there's another example. Again, this is in that honeymoon period where everything's kind of sunny and fine and whatnot. But then getting into the portraiture, where every single creature for me has a different character, and if you're walking down the street and you see this extraordinary face that, if you're a portrait photographer, compels you to take their photograph. Imagine you see somebody who looks like Samuel Beckett walking down the street, and just this glorious face that you have to photograph. There is something about certain animals that compel me to want to take their portrait, and I'll just keep going back and back and back until I get that portrait. This particular gorilla, I was also very lucky in that it's so unusual to see a gorilla pose in that way, present themselves. I'm basically waiting for animals to present themselves for their portrait to kind of grace me with that opportunity to take their portrait. So this is one such example. Man. So this is, I say man, because if I carried on trying to take photographs of cheetahs for the rest of my life, I don't think I would ever get such perfect choreography again. If cheetah spoke human, or I spoke cheetah, I could not direct them to perform more perfectly for me and position themselves in that way. This lion, I waited 17 days with him fast asleep, and as, again, Franz and Nick will probably tell you, your patience does really get tried sometimes. Oddly, actually, I never lose my patience with animals, only with human beings. So this particular lion just slept and slept and slept for 17 days. I got through entire seasons of The Sopranos, waiting for him to do something. You need the contrast. You're out there in this middle of paradise. You need some kind of grimy urban reality as kind of contrast. Just a tip if you are planning on spending 5 weeks with a lion anytime soon in the Masai Mara. Breaking Bad works very well as well, by the way. So yeah, 17 days, flat out. Finally, this storm comes along, and it hits him like a freight train, and bang, he gets up, and finally, I get my portrait of him.
Would you explain about, first place, where you're photographing and how you are this close to the animal?
So I photograph in reserves and national parks where the animals are partly habituated, so they are predisposed to some degree to be approached. But then it requires a whole lot more patience of just getting to know them, waiting with them, until finally they're completely used to you. So that's why I'm saying 17 days, he doesn't care. He's not interested in me. He's smelling whatever game is on the wind. Yeah.
And would you like to tell us why you always use black and white and why you always use film?
I always use black and white. Well, there are certain portrait photographers, be it, Richard Avedon or Yusuf Karsh or whomever, who always use black and white and were compelled aesthetically to use that medium, that were moved by that medium, that were found the kind of the graphic formalizing, the simplification of the form to be compelling to them. Same with me. Also in this instance, when I started this series, I was taking photographs that were of animals that would ultimately be from another era and a bygone era, and so color was too modern a sensibility. Black and white always felt it's timeless or from another time, so it felt always more aesthetically appropriate. And film, as I say in my essay in Inherit the Dust, film just turns me on. Digital, sorry all you digital photographers, but digital, it leaves me cold. I find it too, I'm a masochist, okay? I'm a masochist. I want the struggle, torment, paranoia, stress, and neurosis of not knowing what I've got. I want to... I'm not sure why that deserves a round of applause. If you can all come up afterwards and explain why I got that applause for that, I'd really like to know, because in those times when listen, every photographer went through this as a matter of course 20 years ago, 15 years ago. It's particularly unnerving when you're in Africa and the nearest place to process the film is London or Cape Town, 3,000 miles away. And of course, I actually do really like, genuinely, not being able to see what I'm photographing. When I'm shooting those portraits, when I was, obviously I don't do it anymore, but I feel that I'm in that moment, making that connection with that animal, and if I start checking what I'm getting, I'm taking myself out of that moment. And staying truly connected with that animal by not breaking out of that moment, seeing what I've got, maybe second guessing, maybe guessing badly how I should change. Yeah, I'm sure there are plenty of times you are checking and making a wise, smart correction. And there are also plenty of times I've lost many, many shots and had to go back and reshoot and la 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 la. But film, yeah, there's the interaction of light and negative, that in black and white at least, the surprises, the unexpected, serendipitous surprises that stimulate me.
And you speak of these as portraits, which they certainly look like. They seem to have, every animal has got a character of some sort. But they also have a lot of feel of studio portraiture in some way, the way they're framed, the significance of the figure in the middle. It's like standing portraits in a studio portrait of some sort, so that they work on two levels. That they are familiar to us. We know what elephants look like, but they're familiar to us as a form of photography. Look at the way it's framed, for example. We have plenty of pictures of people standing, framed like that. And there is, I know you think of them as an elegy, there is a strangely 19th century feel to them, the tonality, what am I saying? And the kind of severity. I'm thinking when you say you're lucky, you are looking for, in a way, for a decisive moment. You are waiting until they find some form that you were either looking for or that strikes you as being right.
Well, I think I'm photographing animals in exactly the same way I would photograph human beings.
Yeah,
I really
that's
don't
fair.
think of them as any different. And so it's just that I can't direct them to pose for their portrait, so I have to wait for that moment. I mean, you mentioned, studio portraits, just going back to, I've always was reminded of those George Horrell studio portraits with Hollywood movie stars with the satin blowing, draping, and this is my favorite of all elephants. I hope to God he's still alive. His name's Craig, which is really not a very good name for an elephant. He should be called Ulysses. But, when he was named and he was this big, I mean, obviously they didn't know he was going to turn into Ulysses. But 3 weeks spending time with him until he's just so relaxed. He's just, allowing me to take his portrait. And this girl, she was always for me the Christy Turlington of lions. Even though she has a beard, but go with the analogy. And 14 days of, I just had this image of, with that beard, I wanted her in profile against a dark background and just waiting and waiting till finally she sat in front of a rock in the Serengeti and presented herself for her portrait. And then we come to Igor. Elephant drinking. So this was shot in 2007. His name was Igor. He was 45 years old. And by the way, you talk about the studio portrait. I remember I was at Photo LA when there was a large print of this there, and I kind of like overhearing what people are saying, and these two guys were very they were saying, well, obviously, you can see this is shot in a studio. You can see where, the backdrop is, and, you can feel where the soft 10K light, blah, 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 is coming in. And actually, the reason that I liked the photograph so much as soon as I saw it on the contact sheet was because it looked like a studio backdrop. And it looked like studio lighting. But, of course, it's not. Anyway, the point is, of course, that Igor was killed by poachers 2 years after this photo was taken, and we'll get round to that again a little later. But at that point, this now things start getting a little more melancholy. And don't worry, the baby's alive. I just want you to know. But there is a more conscious attempt to have a more melancholic atmosphere, and as I take the portraits. And by the way, that elephant is also alive. I'm kind of curious to keep bringing Franz and Nick into it tonight, but I've never seen a adult elephant lying down and the baby standing next to an adult lying down. I don't know if you guys have, wherever you are, but that was so unusual. But again, the mood of the piece, even though the mother was alive, it just is kind of. This is actually. I actually drive away from kills. Most people kind of rush towards them, terribly excited. To me, I just being a glass half empty kind of person, I just see the animal that's being killed, and it kind of really upsets me. But in this particular, everything about this photograph I should actually hate. She's got her mouth open now. When you're taking a portrait of a human being, you're not going to take the shot when somebody's got their mouth open, and if you are, you're going to dump it. She's got her mouth open. She's a little bit on the tubby side. Not great. And the light's horrible, but, it's like a double portrait. The wildebeest in death, you can't really see, well, maybe you can a bit. It's got its glassy eye staring up to the heavens. And it becomes a kind of double portrait, and that level of starkness, I would have run a mile from taking a photograph like that 5 years earlier. But this was more an appropriate direction to be going with, and this ended the second book, A Shadow Falls, with an abandoned ostrich egg on the lake bed, which Vicky and I were talking about a little earlier. And I said, well, it's kind of like, is it the end or a new beginning? And as Vicky pointed out, well, it's obviously not a new beginning because the egg is abandoned. And I went, oh, yeah. Oh, right. It's only taken me like 9 years to have that pointed out to me. Oh, dear, oh, dear.
I've actually wondered, I know these animals get comfortable with you, but I'm a little surprised that the mothers with babies get so comfortable, because generally in the animal world, the mothers are extraordinarily protective of their babies.
I think it's just the habituation. They realize we're no threat. I guess, yeah.
Well, I suppose that's true. But I was in Alaska in the fall when the animals, where the bears were stuffing themselves in order to hibernate, and there was a mother bear there and 3 baby cubs. And she was impervious to a bus full of people going by. Yeah. So I suppose there's a point at which they've seen so many people. But still.
And that also, by the way, can actually ultimately lead to their death, because you worry they become so habituated to humans in the form of tourists that when they do venture out of, as they inevitably do, venture out of the often very confined, the confines of a park or reserve, they're too trusting, and a poacher will just take them out. So in going into the third book, I started going a bit darker, and there was this place called Lake Natron in northern Tanzania, where the lake is extraordinarily reflective, and the birds, the theory is the creatures they kind of misread it, and they crash into the lake, and basically it's got the highest soda and salt content in the world of any lake, and it basically the carcasses wash ashore petrified. And it's the most extraordinary treasure hunt. You walk down the shoreline and come across these extraordinary creatures that for me are completely compelling. So the idea was to take them in death and kind of just take them as I found them and place them on branches and stuff where they would appear alive again in death, where I was able to take their portrait in a way that I'd never have been able to had they been alive, especially because, of course, I don't use telephoto lenses and yada yada. So that's a fish eagle, and that is obviously a flamingo that was kind of like this bizarre Swan Lake kind of thing going on. And just, the way we found it with this rather, beautiful, for me, shape. That's some kind of dove. And no, it's not projected upside down. If I had put it the other way, you'd all be going like that right now. It is the right way round because, of course, it's a portrait, and you want to see the face. So if the bat is hanging upside down, there's the sky below, and there's the mountain above. So that's an extraordinarily preserved bat. I mean, you can see just the teeth, the little hairs. I find it kind of compelling as a treasure hunt kind of thing. So Lake Natron, off you go. 120-degree heat and not a lot to eat.
And it's because it's so reflective that they
That's the theory. The theory is, it's like glass. And I think actually, and it's so caustic that my Kodak film boxes, the ink, you just dip it in, and it would just strip the ink off immediately. And if you get a cut, we'd go in with waders, and if you just even had the slightest nick, it's...
But then a bird is flying into an image of another bird.
Well, think about all the birds that die flying into plate glass windows.
But is that because of reflection or because they think they can go through?
They think they can go through.
But if you saw your reflection, you would not necessarily think you could go through.
Maybe you don't have time. Let me just. I've got a flamingo just waiting in the wings. Come in and. You always want to do that Marshall McLuhan moment.
We left him at the restaurant.
What? Yeah. So that's that sequence, I think. Oh, and then to kind of carry on with just a reanimated alive again in death. This is obviously a hunting trophy of a male lion that I placed up on. That's actually the rock where I got married. Just a little side note of no consequence whatsoever. I wanted this feeling that he was looking out across at the plains where he once roamed.
Was this before Cecil was killed?
Way before, yeah. And actually, talking of Cecil, I mean, the reason that we are it had so much coverage and we were so moved, I really think has a lot to do with naming of the animals. If that had been C1347, or, nobody would have paid anything like the same attention. That anthropomorphizing through naming of animals does really help bring home for many people the, I hope, just that these animals are like us. So we've jumped back now to paradise for a reason. I spent many, to do a Samuel Beckett reference twice in 1 hour. There's those great lines that I'm going to mangle that he wrote about try again, fail better. Did I get that right?
I think so.
So I spent years trying to basically get the quintessential line of elephants crossing the lake bed, or just any piece of clear land. And this was my best fail better. This is not ideal, but it's my fail better. But the elephant at the front of that line, her name was Mariana. A photograph was taken in 2008. The following year, she was killed by poachers. And she was a glorious matriarch. There she is leading her herd with all that knowledge, all those decades of knowledge that she brings to the herd. And that photograph then became was an inspiration for this, which is not photoshopped. Those are 23 Big Life Rangers. Big Life Foundation is the foundation I co-founded in 2010 to help protect an ecosystem in Kenya and Tanzania. And they're holding the tusks of elephants that were killed at the hands of man. Those tusks at the front, there is probably no elephant left alive on the continent with tusks that size anymore. They've all been killed. And those tusks would probably bring in excess of $500,000 in China today. So that's the kind of battle that we have been facing with poaching. These are the same tusks. This is another Big Life Ranger where I just wanted it to feel like, is he mourning? Is he praying? Who knows? So that is kind of the direction, as I was obviously heading in this final body of work across the ravaged land. And reaching a point of where at the beginning of that trilogy, it was a land of plenty, a land of verdant wonder. Just now we're reduced to a few lonely elephants crossing these desolate plains. And then the final image in the trilogy, just this row of footprints of a lone elephant walking off into the distance. And we wonder, will he ever come back? Will he ever be able to come back? Will he make it back? Will he come back with others? Who knows? So that was the end of the trilogy. Sorry to be such a downer, everyone. It gets worse, but you can't wait.
I think about how patient you've been looking for some of these things. Henri Cartier-Bresson said that oddly enough, the harder he worked, the luckier he got.
Yep, I would agree with that.
A lot of people say that, and it seems like the longer you wait, the luckier you got. That's another. You were looking for something. I'm sure that sometimes it was fortuitous. It wasn't something you knew you were looking for, but sometimes you were looking for something like that line of elephants, and they finally conformed to your wishes, which was
not quite, but being the glass half empty person,
being
they got close.
Getting elephants, they came pretty close.
Yeah, but yes, I do think that hard work breeds luck, can breed luck. Yes.
Yeah. Then this looks like very dry land, and I know there's a dry season, but there have been a lot of droughts in Africa as well.
This is actually a lake bed where it is seasonal, and every for 9-10 months of the year it is actually like this anyway. So it was wet. The elephant walked across and left its footprints. So that's not unusual.
No, but hasn't there been an extra change because of climate change? I understand there's been in areas of Africa they've had year after year after year of drought.
I mean, you can apply that to, of course, most of the planet except the northeastern United States, particularly Washington, D.C., and particularly the Senate chamber with Mitch McConnell. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
We've also had the opposite.
And James Inhofe, by the way, with his stupid snowball. I could go on, but it sounds like I'd be preaching to the choir here. So yes, Vicky, continue.
It does indeed. Well, but somebody said that climate change might do them in, but you could do away with climate change and you still wouldn't lose all the animals.
Sorry, you could do away, and you'd still lose them in spite of climate change, you're
Yes.
saying? No, absolutely not. No, there is hope, and we'll kind of get to that at the end. I mean, there is absolute hope, and as we go into Inherit the Dust, which does seem like a completely dystopian, apocalyptic body of work, there is hope in it. I just can't capture it in these particular photographs, as well as the dystopian stuff.
Well, some of your elegies were elegies avant la lettre. They were elegies in expectation of destruction.
Yeah. But not at the pace that I expected. I got to the end of the trilogy, big sigh, and realized that it was not capturing the speed of destruction that I saw happening, the sheer escalation of destruction that went far beyond poaching. Even I, being there the amount of time that I was, kind of thought, oh, it's mainly poaching, which is apocalyptic in the way that it is wiping out so much of the African continent. But it goes beyond that. It goes into there being just simply too many of us. The encroachment. Here comes the rain. Talking of, not having a drought.
Almost exactly on schedule.
But it was weather.com, you said, right?
What? No, but yes, weather.com said it was coming at 8 o'clock.
Right.
They get the web up there.
So, where was I? Apocalypse. Yes, of course, apocalypse, the end of the world. Oh, yes, back to the end of the world. What always really fascinated me was what lived where we are sitting right now, everywhere in the world. What came before us? That to me was what I wanted to be taught in history. I didn't want to learn about battles and treaties and all that crap. I wanted to learn about what came right where we now sit. And where we now sit, there used to live woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers and, hold on, woolly mammoths. I wish I could time travel and have taken this. I mean, I know it's like an illustration, but that's a fantasy if there ever is one, to go back in time and photograph woolly mammoths, and from the low angle without a telephoto lens, and with a cloudscape, Jesus.
And you didn't even take that picture.
Yeah, these animals lived in these exact places. Ground sloths. I mean, look at them. So that just fascinated me, the idea of the animals that lived where they used to roam. And of course, the thing is that they're gone. They've long gone from America and Europe, but they do still exist in Africa. So that then became the concept for Inherit the Dust. Even though kind of it was the genesis for Inherit the Dust, even though we're kind of living in the antithesis of Genesis right now. So yeah, do you want me to start on the next shots? Shall I hit the button? So the idea was that I went back through all my old contact sheets from 2003 to 2012 and started picking out photographs that hadn't made it, hadn't been released, I hadn't thought were good enough, or what maybe were good enough, but there was another reason that I didn't release them. And we printed them up at my home in California, to life size, to just kind of get it, to measure it right, and then printed them in strips, shipped all these strips to Kenya, and then built these panels on location. This is a tent on location in Kenya where these aluminum and plywood panels were built, and the photographs were glued down, and then those panels were carried out. That's a 30-foot long photograph of a group of rhinos. And then they were erected on location, as you can see. And then, we set up the shots. That's me in the foreground. And so getting ready to shoot, and then the final shot, there you go. The idea was to take these photographs where the animals used to roam, but no longer do, and line up the horizons as best that I could with as similar light as possible to make them feel like they were genuinely there. So for example, in this photograph, that entire block of dirt had to be bulldozed in to get the panel up to that height so the horizon line matched up. Which, of course, a lot of you, this comes back to the P word again. A lot of you would be thinking, well, it just looks like you did it in Photoshop, dude. And it obviously drives me crazy that I went to all this trouble and money and time to shoot it for real, for a lot of you just to go, oh, it just looks like you did it in Photoshop. And yes, you could have done it in Photoshop, but it wouldn't have been as good. It wouldn't have been as good, Was that for the impersonation or for the actual content? I don't know. I'm telling
Nobody
you.
answered.
No. And the other thing about doing it for real is great stuff happens that you don't expect when you have stuff there. So for the first couple, these are all at the beginning of the shoot. So for the first few days, I had this really bad idea that I would need to kind of gather together the local people and hire them, and then have an assistant director, and we shout action, and they'd all walk around in very robotic fashion, and it looked crap. It was really stiff, it was really dull, and after a couple of days, I just realized, not good, let's start again. So I just decided, look, I'm waiting for days and days for cloud cover. I'm just going to see what happens. And so at its most simple, stuff like this happens, where had the rhino not been there, I wouldn't have realized that this guy's just standing there, just getting, he's just standing there, whatever he's doing, what he's doing. But it just the connection of looking again, like, is he in mourning? Is he praying? However you interpret, the point is I only discovered that because the panel was there to give me that idea. The train hit the panel. Yeah, it was fine. The zebra survived, but the train hit the panel, and this is how extraordinarily unobservant one can be, that not seeing the wood for the trees, because you're so tunnel vision about everything being just so, that actually it took 3 months before somebody saw the photograph and said, oh, that's so cool, the stripes on the train, matching the stripes of the zebra. I hadn't even noticed. But the location scouts were out for months looking for locations before I got there to find locations where the, the locations in the photographs would match the locations within the landscape in which we were going to shoot. And so you'd end up with stuff like that where it can almost appear too perfect, that people think you've obviously faked it because, you know, it's too perfect. So this place, the people at this dump site, they obviously live there in these kind of shacks, if you can even call them shacks, on the periphery of the dump site. And every day the trucks roll up and the people swarm around the trucks to grab literally the rotting food that is coming out of the garbage trucks. And that obviously happens in a lot of poverty-stricken places in the third world. It was extremely distressing to see. And the point I'm hoping to make in these photographs is that it's not just the animals that are the victims of environmental devastation, it's also the human beings. Meanwhile, so I wanted the people to be oblivious to the presence of the animals. I wanted the animals to be like ghosts in the landscape. And whilst I was waiting, so that happened naturally as I was waiting for the clouds to roll in. And this is, for me, a really great example of how important it is to wait for the right kind of clouds, because with the right kinds of clouds comes the right kind of light. Not all flat light is created equal. So if you look at my contact sheet, on that same contact sheet a few minutes earlier, it's really quite boring looking. Not because the clouds are that different, but because the light filtering through the clouds has this somehow different effect on the ground below. And this is how the kids spend their childhoods. That's their playground. And the photograph of the cheetahs, which I think is very ordinary, but worked well in this context because they all kind of look a bit lost to me. Everybody's looking around, not quite knowing where to go next. And then there's this insane amount of speed of construction. Traveling through central Kenya, it kind of felt like a cross between China and India, which really, really surprised me. I was worried that I would be, when I came up with the idea, I was worried that I would be exaggerating or melodramatizing too much, that I just had this notion in my head that was kind of a conceit and no more. But actually, it was kind of endlessly surprising to me. So this place, 2 years earlier, had been savanna where impalas and gazelles and zebras used to roam. And that's not a town falling down into decay, that's a town rising up at incredible speed. I scouted it 3 weeks before I shot, and it was going up so fast I had to ask the construction guys to kind of construct around the back because the stories were going up so fast. And I wanted this feeling of progress, and animals left behind. So that's a long exposure, a couple of seconds, so the people are just in motion, making it feel like, you know, they're in motion while the animals left behind. And for those, I may be getting into too much minutia, but I love how a photograph can be changed in its feeling by flipping it. So this photograph was actually shot flipped. And by turning it this way, it suddenly worked better, because I think we read, in Western society, we read left to right. And thus, progress is left to right. The future is left to right. Retreat and the past is right to left. So this way round, the chimpanzee is looking into the past, and his path into the future is blocked by the line of people who are in the future. That may all sound like a load of bollocks. I actually don't think it is. I find that consistently that works. So there were quite a few photographs that I didn't think were good enough back when I took them. This photograph of this chimp, he was looking down, he wasn't really looking at me. I didn't find it that compelling. But in this context, where he's sitting by the side of this stream of fetid sewage, he appears to me to be lamenting the loss of the world that he once knew. And thus, the weakness of the photograph, the original weakness, becomes its strength. This is another example. This elephant, this beautiful matriarch, her name was Kumquat. And that's her family, her daughters. And 1 or 2 weeks after that photograph was taken, she was killed, along with 2 of her daughters, by poachers. And by the way, the poachers were ultimately arrested, are behind bars, thanks to the Big Life Rangers, the rangers from my foundation. But I couldn't look at that photograph for a long time. It really upset me. And then when it came to this series, I realized that little baby, okay, so when you're taking a portrait of human beings and you're doing a group shot, if somebody's head is hidden behind somebody else, you're going to reject it. It's not good enough. Well, again, using that analogy, I take photographs of animals the same way you would take photographs of human beings. That's a reject. But in this context, the weakness of the photograph becomes, I would like to think, its strength, because now the baby appears to be cowering in terror from the trucks thundering by. Ominous thunder roll, thank you. And this giraffe, I didn't think was, it was just about, behind the over-the-shoulder shot of a giraffe looking out across the plains. Now, placed in this context with these kind of War of the Worlds-like cranes, it becomes much more mournful, I would like to think. And I always knew there'd be one crane there, but I never actually expected 4 to show up. Again, the beauty of having everything in situ and seeing what surprises you. And there's, a lion that I just didn't think was a good enough shot of a lion, but in this setting, he appears to be looking over the world that he once knew. And so we come to this shot. I wanted one photograph where somebody saw the animals, and it always, for me, needed to be a child, a young child. Because for me, when we are born, I believe we have a natural, instinctual connection to nature. And as we grow up, whether it's peer pressure or teen pressure or video game pressure or iPad pressure, whatever, we begin to lose that connection to nature. And sometimes we get it back, sometimes we don't, but at the beginning we still have it. So I wanted this one little kid, the one on the left, to be looking at the elephants. But then because the panel is there, this other little kid walks in, that was a complete surprise. And again, because the panel was there in reality, I realized, because again, this was a photograph I didn't think was good enough back in the day. I just didn't quite work well enough for me. But in this setting, framed by those gargantuan concrete pillars, they look trapped, they look lost, they seem to be, the mother seems to be making a connection with these homeless kids. Everybody in that photograph is homeless. Those kids on the right are all high, sniffing glue. And actually, hold on. We've got crops on this. And in the background, that billboard is of a middle-class African man leaning back in his garden chair, and the tagline underneath reads, "Lean back, your life is on track." So there's just, that to me kind of summed it all up. Vicky, sorry, I've talked a lot.
I think these photographs are extremely complicated and metaphoric. Excuse me, and I'm losing my voice, obviously, but so it goes. Some of these people will never see an elephant in the flesh, and they will never be here in the flesh. And in fact, The photographs are memorials, and some of these elephants that are in the photographs died a week, 2 years later, whatever, but they are elegiac. They are like daguerreotypes on tombstones in a way, that this is an animal that can't live here, so he's moved off to some place that may then be too crowded. And nobody here who is suffering, not yet dead, but suffering, is paying any attention except these young children. If you'll forgive me, it made me think instantly of a poem by Auden called Musée de Beaux-Arts, which is about two paintings by Bruegel. One is the Crucifixion, the other is the Fall of Daedalus. And I just want to read you a kind of expurgated first half of it because it just sums up this photograph for me. About suffering, they were never wrong, the old masters. How well they understood its human positions, how it takes place while someone else is eating or opening a window or just walking daily along. How they never forgot that even the dreadful martyrdom, of course that's about Jesus on the cross, but these elephants have been martyred too, that even the dreadful martyrdom must run its course, anyhow in a corner, some untidy spot where the dogs go on with their doggy life and the torturer's horse scratches its innocent behind on a tree. And that is the way a lot of suffering does take place. I don't know about you, but sometimes I pass homeless on the streets of New York or Boston, and I wince at it, but what do? I don't take them home with me. You know, sometimes I make an effort to avoid them. These people aren't making the effort, they're just avoiding them. It's the way they live their lives. So I think they're rather amazing.
Oh, thank you. Well, there is hope. So this is, on the left, the range of elephants a century or so ago, 27 million elephants across the length and breadth of Africa. And on your right, in 2011, are the few spots in which they remain. And since then, we're losing 30,000 elephants a year to poachers and other stuff, human-wildlife conflict. And so you can knock another 150,000 off that map. And that's how you end up with beautiful elephants. His name was Tawnir, and he was poisoned by poachers with spears. The spears had poison on them, and they just slowly poison them, and they follow them. And then the elephant's probably still alive when they get a chainsaw and hack out their tusks. You've got to understand, a third of the tusk is still within the skull. And once the elephant is down and weakened, you just go in with a chainsaw. They're too weak. So they are often having their tusks cut out of their heads while they're still alive. So when I went back to Kenya in 2010, to start the third part of the trilogy, I was horrified at how many elephants that I knew were dead and being killed on an almost weekly basis. And there was so little that seemed to be being done. Amboseli National Park is the one at the center. It's tiny, it's 100,000 acres. Elephants and all the other animals, they only spend about 20% of their time in that park because it's just so small. And once they leave that park, they are completely vulnerable. They are in community land where anybody can just basically come along to kill them because there's no government body like the Kenya Wildlife Service to protect them. And there's almost no NGOs who have money or doing anything. And poachers come across the Tanzanian border and would kill elephants and then escape back over to Tanzania with the ivory with complete impunity. And I saw all this happening and was horrified and felt like I had to do something because it's better to be angry and active than angry and passive. Being angry and passive gets you nowhere. It just leaves you bitter and depressed. And so I decided to start this foundation, Big Life, and was incredibly lucky to find a partner in Richard Bonham, who is this amazing conservationist who had been there for 20 years, but had never had the money to be able to do much, but had the knowledge and the relationships. And fortunately, I was able to tap into wealthy collectors of my photographs and very quickly raise significant amounts of money to buy Land Cruisers, hire rangers, build outposts. And over the course of the coming 5 years, the ecosystem went from this to that. And today, it's now 41 outposts across, permanent and mobile, across the 2 countries, protecting 2 million acres of ecosystem with tracker dogs and aerial monitoring. And with that, the poaching in that area is almost zero. Thank you. Thank you.
Just right.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Of course, it's not that simple. And this ties in with the work of In Inherit the Dust, which is the sheer number of us. So there's a whole new problem that comes along, which is too many of us. Oh, so by the way, am I doing Donald Trump or am I doing Woody Allen? You have to, okay, so how the hell do you stop poaching across a 2 million acre area, with what is, here are 40 or so of the Big Life Rangers. Now, I couldn't get all of them in one shot, so that's 300 and something of them. That's all the Big Life Rangers. Now, I'm just going to go back and save that up a second. So, those 300 plus rangers could basically sit in the first 8 rows of this theater. How the hell do the first 8 rows of this theater, how do all of you protect 2 million acres of ecosystem? And the answer is community, the local community. Every one of those rangers has family, and that family, their mother, their brother, their father, their uncle is a ranger who they're proud of, who is bringing in steady income. So almost every time a poacher comes into the ecosystem, we get to hear about it. And it is so successful that on the kind of poacher grapevine, poachers kind of know not to come into the ecosystem. There's too much chance of them getting caught. So the community increasingly understands that conservation helps them, and that is the Big Life ethos. Conservation supports the community, and the community will support conservation, and it's working. But here's the ecosystem, like 30 years ago. There's the, or not quite, but some time ago. There's the Abercelli up in the top left corner. And over the course of time, this happens. That's farmland. And what happens with farmland? Elephants come in and raid the crops. There are thousands of crosses where elephants raid the crops. And what happens when elephants raid crops? They get killed. If you're a poor farmer and your livelihood is threatened in one night by an elephant raiding your crops, you too would be tempted to throw a spear at that elephant and perhaps kill it. And so we've got no elephants being poached, but we've got, this year alone, 6 elephants that have been killed from human-wildlife conflict, 8 last year. But there is a solution. And it may not sound as sexy as the good guys in green catching the bad guys, but it is a line of protection, a fence. And that heavy blue line is the first 40 kilometers of fence. Those green arrows are the migration. Those orange dots are the Big Life, some of the Big Life outposts. And if you look at that right arrow, look at the gap between the tiny, tiny clogged artery gap between the farmland. It's less than 1 kilometer. So time is absolutely of the essence. Now, amazingly, this weekend, We ran an appeal for the first 40 kilometers for $400,000. And one amazing donor committed $200,000 as a matching gift. And by Tuesday, we had it. In a few months, we will be able to start building that first 40 kilometers. But look at that island up there. There's that island to deal with. Look at all those red crosses. So now we've got to raise funds for that part as well. So basically, not to turn this into a kind of ad hoc fundraiser, I am actually asking you guys tonight, if you can, if you feel interested and motivated, to donate to Big Life, because it's not just about making the planet a more beautiful place, about making it a more, just the poetry of it. It's also the pragmatism. That's what we have to look at now for the future of wildlife. The only way that we can keep wildlife alive in so many parts of the world in this day and age is to be completely pragmatic and look at the long-term economic benefit of it. There will be just give you an example. So there's this French cement factory who are planning to put a cement factory right down in the middle of one of those wildlife corridors going north. And that is short-term economic gain. That would basically destroy the livelihood for thousands of people employed, not just, Big Life is already the biggest employer in the region as a single entity, but across the ecosystem, nature tourism is the biggest employer. We're talking about thousands of people. You stick down a cement factory, you're jeopardizing that. So when you protect those animals, you are protecting everybody. You're protecting the natural world, you're protecting the animals, you're protecting the local communities, and you're making the planet a better place. So it's a win-win for everybody. And the elephants are happy, and the rangers are happy. And here's a list of what your money brings you. So that's kind of what I want to leave you guys with tonight. And by the way, if you go over to the exhibition, there's actually a cash box where you can just drop in your cash. Or you can go to biglife.org and donate copious amounts there. Thanks.
I wonder if you think that E.O. Wilson's proposal is practical.
Which is?
That he says that we will not exist unless, because we are making so many species extinct every day, that we need to set aside really large tracts of land on which nothing can be built. Not a shanty, not a cement factory or something, and you just leave it alone.
Well, and you know, to be clear, you take away those animals in certain areas, there is nothing left for human beings. There are just livestock herders who, with each drought that comes due to man-made climate change, there will be nothing left for people. So, but there is right now. People, the local communities is sitting on a gold mine, an elephant mine. And just one there I go with that thing again. That one statistic, which I find quite compelling, is when an elephant is killed, on average, it will garner apparently around $20,000 for the poacher and the dealer. Meanwhile, it has been calculated that during the course of an elephant's lifetime, if it lives out its natural life, it will bring in an estimated $1.6 million for that country's economy and the local communities. So from a purely pragmatic point of view, hello.
As we were discussing earlier, elephants have become the go-to charity at the moment. They've had a lot of celebrity support. And one charity that was for animals in the wild, not yours, there are some others, said that once some of the people like Susan Sarandon, Kanye West, whoever it was, got in on this, that their donations went up 90%.
Okay, that's great.
And a man named Ron Nielsen, who's the head of some governing body of charities all over, says the only way, it doesn't matter how many celebrities you've got, the only way you can control it is to get ex-CIA agents who are in touch with the intelligence in those countries, who can tell you which people working at the Mombasa port are being bribed.
I think all of that's correct. I think everything helps. It's a multi-pronged, multifaceted campaign. I think celebrities coming on board, fantastic. I don't like when people become very petty and think celebrities are doing it for PR. In my experience, they're doing it because they genuinely, passionately believe in the cause. And they're not just doing it as some kind of glib PR stunt. But you have to attack from every angle. You have to attack supply and demand. So that's why groups like Wild Aid are so amazing, because they deal with the other. What Big Life is doing is triage on the ground in Africa, whilst groups like Wild Aid are trying to, as quickly as possible, educate hundreds of millions of people in the Far East who think that tusks just fall naturally out of the elephants like teeth, and some nice little fella comes around and picks them up and ships them off. The success they've had with the reduction in shark fins consumption through advertising, education has been incredible. So you've got to come at it from every angle. And yes, he's absolutely right about the corruption of the guys in the port. All of it helps. Yeah.
Last question, do you think photographs help?
I don't know. Obviously, I would like to think so, because this is what I do, and it's applying my skill set to trying to make a difference. I hope I'm some kind of incremental cog in the wheel of change. I don't know how much difference it makes. I think that certainly being able to then apply what I've gained from the exposure to then raise money to then have Big Life, for example, has made clearly a tangible, concrete difference. Thanks. Thank you. But as to the photographs themselves, I don't know. Like, in other words, will people look at the original portraits and kind of be more aware of the sentience of those creatures, and them being fellow creatures that are equally worthy of life as us? I don't know. I hope so. The point is, Jesus, even if it's like 10 people, it's something. That's what I mean about incremental. So you do what you can, and that's the thing. It's like everybody, whatever your particular passion is, whatever your particular cause is, just go up and do it. It all counts. It all helps. It all makes a difference, whether you're just, saving a homeless cat or saving the garbage for recycling. All of it helps. And the worst thing is just to do nothing. Just doesn't matter how small it is. So I think it all counts.
I have 2 last words to say. Hear, hear.
Oh.